Namaste. Welcome to the Advaita channel. Today I shall continue reading from Bankei's Unborn, reading the sermons of Zen Master Bankei, who lived from 1622 to 1693. I also feel for some quiet time to take in these teachings today, and so I've chosen to finish with a guided meditation which contains mostly silence actually, from Adyashanti on the Unborn. If you can let me know if there are any video or audio problems, I'd be very grateful. Some quiet. So, to continue reading from the Ryumonji sermons. I was 26 when it suddenly came to me that all things are perfectly resolved in the unborn. Since then, I've been trying to tell others about it. I've been all over, but from the time of that realization until now, I haven't found anyone anywhere who was a match for this tongue of mine. When I attained realization, there wasn't any wise teacher. Or at least I didn't have occasion to meet up with him, so there was no way for me to get confirmation of my understanding. I had a very difficult time of it. I haven't forgotten the trouble I had. And so now, although I'm not well, as you can see, I have made a great vow to do my best to give confirmation to anyone who is enlightened. That's why I come here every day and meet with you all. My own health ceases to be a concern. So if anyone thinks he or she has realized something, step out here and say so. I'll confirm it for you. When I was 30 years old, my teacher told me that a Zen priest named Dosha Chogun had come over from the China and was now residing in Nagasaki. He thought it would be a good idea for me to go and meet him. As I made my preparations for the trip, the master said to me, "You've managed to get by until now, wearing layman's robes. But if you're going to have an interview with a Chinese priest, you can't very well go dressed like that. Put on a proper priest's robe before you leave for your meeting with Dosha." So, wearing the Buddhist robes for the first time, I met with Zen Master Dosha. Right off, I told him about my understanding of the unborn. He took one look at me and said, "This fellow is beyond birth and death." Dosha was the only master at that time who could have given me such confirmation. Even at that time, I wasn't fully satisfied. I can see now, looking back to that meeting, that even Dosha's realization was less than complete. If only he were alive today, I could make him into a fine teacher. It's a great shame. He died too soon. All of you are extremely fortunate. When I was a young man, it was different. I couldn't find a good teacher, and, being headstrong, I devoted myself from an early age to exceptionally difficult training, experiencing suffering others couldn't imagine. I expended an awful lot of useless effort. The experience of that needless ordeal is deeply ingrained in me. It's something I can never forget. Hello, beloved. That's why I came here, like this, day after day, urging you to profit from my own painful example, so you can attain the Dharma easily. While you're seated comfortably on the tatami mats, without all that unnecessary work. You should consider yourselves extremely fortunate, because you won't find a teaching like this anywhere else. Just as I was foolish and bull-headed when I was very young. Sure enough, if I tell you about my experiences, some of the young fellows among you will take it in their heads that they can't achieve the Dharma unless they exert themselves as I did. And if we remember, Bankei sat until he was sore, he sat until he was bleeding, he sat until he became sick, until he gained tuberculosis, and he must have come very close to death before he came to his full awakening. But he's telling us there's no need for it to be this way. If they did this, it would not be my fault. But I do want to tell you about them, so let's make this point perfectly clear to the young men. You can attain the Dharma without putting yourself through the arduous struggle I did. I want you to remember that carefully as you listen to what I say. My father was a masterless samurai, originally from the island of Shikoku, a Confucian. He moved and took up residence in this area, and this is where I was born. He died when I was still quite young, and my mother raised me. She told me that I was a very unruly youngster, and that I used to lead all the neighbourhood children in making mischief. She said that from the age of 2 or 3 I showed an aversion to death and dying. When I cried, my family could get me to stop by pretending they were dead, or by talking about death. This method was also used to put an end to all my mischief. When I came of age, this being an era where Confucian learning was enjoying a great vogue, I was sent to a Confucian teacher. My mother had him teach me the great learning by the rote method. When I came to the place where it says that the way of great learning lies in clarifying great bright virtue, I just couldn't understand what they meant. They raised doubts in my mind that remained for a long time. I remember one day I asked some Confucian scholars about bright virtue. What was it? What did it mean? But none of them could give me an answer. One of them said that knotty problems like mine were something that Zen priests knew about. He told me to ask one of them. He admitted that since he and his fellow Confucians devoted all their time to explaining the literal meaning of the Confucian writings, they didn't know what bright virtue really meant. Since I was still no closer to an understanding bright virtue, I decided to follow his advice. But in those days, there were no Zen temples in the area, so I was unable to find any Zen priest to question. I then decided that, no matter what happened, I was going to get to the bottom of this bright virtue. I was also determined to tell my elderly mother about it before she departed this life. I groped about uncertainly, hoping to throw some light on the problem. I attended sermons and lectures. If I heard a sermon was being held somewhere, I'd run off immediately and listen to it. When I returned home, I'd tell my mother about what I'd heard. But bright virtue remained beyond my grasp. Now, more determined than ever, I finally succeeded in locating a Zen priest. He told me that if I wanted to understand bright virtue, I should do Zazen. Immediately I took up the practice of Zazen. I went into the mountains and sat without eating for 7 days. Tucking my robes up, I sat directly on the sharp surface of the rocks. Once in position, without a thought at all for my health, I didn't stop until I could no longer sit up under my own power and toppled over. Because of where I was, no one brought food to me, so I often ended up not eating for days on end. I returned home after that. I fashioned a small hut and shut myself up in it. I recited the Nembutsu and would enter a Nembutsu samadhi and go long periods without sleep. I tried everything I could think of, but still I got nowhere. I remember trying as hard as this. As I pushed myself past the bounds of physical endurance, with this complete lack of regard for my health, the skin of my buttocks became lacerated, making it extremely painful for me to sit. But I must have had a constitution of iron in those days, because I was able to go right on without spending even a single day lying down to recuperate. To lessen the pain from my buttocks, I placed several layers of soft paper over the ground and sat on them, changing them frequently. Unless I did, there was considerable bleeding from the torn skin, and that, together with the pain, would have made sitting impossible. I also tried sitting on cotton wadding. Despite these difficulties, never once, day or night, did I lie down to rest. The adverse effects of the long years of physical punishment built up and finally led to a serious illness. And I still hadn't clarified bright virtue. In spite of all the time and effort I had spent wrestling with it. My illness steadily worsened. I grew weaker and weaker. Yes, Shakti, Mujiji has certainly shown us the lazy man's way, just as Bankei was showing. It's a shame so few listened to him in the end. And these thousands came to him, and yet so few teachers. It took until Muji came along. I grew weaker and weaker. Wherever I spat, gouts of bloody sputum as big as a thumb's head appeared. Once I spat against a wall, and the globules stuck and slid to the ground in bright red beads. The kindly people who lived nearby said that I should recuperate my health in the hut. They arranged for someone to look after me. But the illness now reached a critical stage. For a whole week, I couldn't swallow anything except some thin rice broth. I became resigned to the fact that I was going to die. I viewed it as inevitable and felt no great regret. The only thing that really bothered me was having to die without having discovered the meaning of bright virtue, which had had sole possession of my thoughts for so long. Then I felt a strange sensation in my throat. I spat against a wall. A mass of black, large as a soapberry, rolled down the side. It seemed to relieve the discomfort in my chest. Suddenly, just at that moment, it came to me. I realized what it was that had escaped me until now. All things are perfectly resolved in the unborn. I realized too that what I had been doing all this time had been mistaken. I knew all my efforts had been in vain. At the same time, my illness showed definite signs of improvement. Overjoyed, I found that my appetite had returned. I called to the nurse, told him I thought I could eat something, and asked him to prepare some rice gruel. While he seemed to think it was a strange request coming from someone at death's door, he was delighted and hurriedly began to prepare the food. In his eagerness to feed me as quickly as possible, he gave me the gruel before the rice had been cooked through. But I didn't even notice. I wolfed down 2 or 3 bowls of it, without suffering any adverse effects. From that point on, I improved steadily, and here I am, still alive today. I was able to fulfill my vow after all, and also to bring my mother to an understanding of the unborn. It's a beautiful gift to give one's mother. From that time until today, I have encountered no one anywhere who could disprove my teaching. If only I had encountered someone with a real understanding of the Dharma to speak with whilst I was travelling from place to place, struggling with my problem. I wouldn't have had to expend all that useless effort. But there was no such person. And I practiced prolonged and painful austerities, subjecting my body to hardships, so severely punishing that I suffer from the effects even today. That's the reason I'm not able to come here and meet with you as often as I would like. Well, after I realised that all things are resolved by the means of the unborn, I wanted to talk to someone about it. As I was considering whom I should visit, my master told me of a priest named Gudo in the Mino province. He described him as an excellent teacher and advised me to go and have an interview with him. Namaste, Rohit. Ah, Ram. Namaste, Ram, beloved. I followed his advice and travelled to Mino. But Gudo was away in Edo at the time, and I was unable to meet and talk with him. Having already come that far, however, I thought that rather than return with nothing to show for my trip, I would visit some other Zen priests in the area. I introduced myself to one of them as a Zen monk from the Harima province and told him that I had come all that distance to receive his instruction. He explained the Zen teaching to me. After he had finished, I said, I realise that it's very disrespectful for me to speak at all, but I would like to say something. Please forgive the lack of propriety. All that you and everyone else here has said to me is very true. It's not that I don't agree with it. Only somehow or other, the feeling is that I get a feeling of scratching an itchy foot with my shoe on. It's not getting to the itch. Your teachings don't strike home to the centre, to the real marrow. Surprisingly enough, my words didn't disconcert him in the least. He answered, "Of course, it's just as you say. We teach others in the same manner that we ourselves have been taught. We just follow the teachings of previous masters, which are found written down in sutras and Zen records. I'm ashamed to say it, but the fact is that what we teach isn't really based on enlightenment. Since we're not really enlightened, It's understandable that you should say what you do about our teaching not being able to reach the place that itches. You were able to see through all that and recognize me for what I am. Surely you're no ordinary man. This reminds me of when I had to step away from my own Zen master who I was training under, and I discovered Muji's teachings. All because I was searching for a clear understanding of the unborn, which that very Zen master had introduced to me through Zen master Bankei. Namaste, Dinan. Bankei showed me there was another way. And through Muji I found it. Naturally, under those circumstances, it was impossible to get verification from any of them. I returned home and shut myself up in retreat again. It was then, as I was engaged in contemplating the natural capacity of my fellow men and the means by which they could be instructed in the way, that I heard about Dosha having come to Nagasaki. I went at the suggestion of my teacher Umpo and visited him. And, as I've told you before, he confirmed my understanding. I really had a hard time finding someone able to give positive verification of my enlightenment. There just wasn't anybody. I appear here every day to talk with you for that very reason. If any of you come to enlightenment, you're fortunate to have someone around to give you verification of it. If you believe you've reached enlightenment, then you should say so. Otherwise, you should listen carefully and confirm what I say for yourselves. Then you will be enlightened. When you speak of a Buddha or a patriarch, that is merely a name. Papaji was only saying this very same thing earlier today in Jayani's reading from Truth Is. Buddha is just a name. It's just a name. It is a word that is left behind after they appear or are born, and is several removes from the sight of the unborn itself, and thus totally unimportant. When you dwell in the unborn itself, you're dwelling at the very wellhead of the Buddhas and the patriarchs, the source. When we dwell in the unborn, we reside at the source of all our masters, all these beautiful masters whose words we share here, all come from this same place. No one can know the dwelling place of a person who is firmly convinced that the Buddha mind is unborn. It isn't known even to Buddhas and patriarchs. If you establish yourself firmly in the unborn, then simply and without any trouble or effort, while sitting comfortably on the tatami mats, you are an authentic Tathagata, a living Buddha. The eye to see others will open in you, and you will be able to see everything from the vantage point of realization. I never err in my judgment of people, nor does anyone else who has the eye of the unborn. So Ramana had the eye of the unborn, Papaji had the eye of the unborn, Ruji has the eye of the unborn. He sees us so clearly. What does he say? He looks at us and he sees only the self. Ananta, the eye of the unborn. Our school has been called the Clear-Eyed Sect for this very reason. And since this ability is possible, because you're dwelling in the unborn Buddha mind, it is sometimes called the Buddha mind sect as well. When the eye to see others opens in you, and you can see straight into their hearts, you may consider that you've fully realized the Buddha's Dharma, because then, at that very place, that's just what you've done. Until you realize for yourselves what I've just said, you may find it hard to believe. You may even think I'm trying to deceive you. But after you leave here, when the day comes that you do realize it, that very day and at that very spot, whoever you are, you too will be able to see into the others' hearts. You'll know that everything I've said is true. Be diligent now, in the interests of that future day. If I were lying to you, my tongue would be pulled out after I die for the sin of speaking falsehood. Do you think I'd be standing here telling you lies, knowing that I'd fall into the tongue-pulling hell for doing it? One of the joys of Buddhism are these great hells which were threatened upon us all. Oh, we're so blessed. The unborn Dharma disappeared in both Japan and China, and it has long since been forgotten. But now it has appeared in the world again, Once you come to be convinced that the unborn illuminated wisdom is unmistakably the Buddha mind, your belief in it becomes unshakable. Then it's as if all the people in the world were to get together and to try to make you believe that a crow was a heron. Since you know very well by your common experience that a crow is by nature black and a heron white, they couldn't convince you no matter how hard or how long they tried. Once you have come to know without any doubt that the marvellous illuminative wisdom of the unborn is the Buddha mind, and that the Buddha mind puts all things in perfect order by means of the unborn, then you can no longer be deluded or led astray by others. People with this unshakable conviction are called the firm and incontrovertible. For today and for endless future ages, they are unborn living Buddhas. When I was young and first began to declare the unborn Dharma, people had trouble understanding it. They thought I was preaching heresy, or they took me for a Christian. They were afraid of me. No one would come near. But it wasn't long before they realized their mistake, and they came to know perfectly well that I was teaching them the true Dharma. Now, instead of their staying away as before, I'm besieged by too many callers, imploring and pressing me to meet with them. I don't have a moment to myself. All things have their season. Since I first came to live in this temple, more than 40 years have passed. And because I've been repeating my teaching over and over during that time, many people can be found in these parts who excel the masters of religion. Your self-partiality is at the root of all your illusions. We care too much about ourselves. There aren't any illusions when you don't have this preference for yourself. That sounds easy enough. Simple. So we stop preferring ourselves. We stop preferring our own needs, our own thoughts. If the men sitting next to you start quarrelling, it may be easy for you to tell which of the disputants is in the right and which is in the wrong, because you're not involved yourself. You're a bystander, so you can keep a cool head. But what if you have a part in it? Then you take your own side and oppose the other fellow. As you fight with each other, you transform your Buddha minds into fighting spirits. Or again, because of the Buddha mind's wonderful illuminative wisdom, such things as you've done and experienced in the past cannot fail to be reflected in it. If you fix onto those images as they reflect, you are unwittingly creating illusion. The thoughts do not already exist at the place where those images are reflecting. They are caused by your past experiences and occur when things you have seen and heard in the past are reflected on the Buddha mind. So our unborn Buddha mind is a mirror. But thoughts originally have no real substance. So if they are reflected, you should just let them be reflected and let them arise when they arise. Don't have any thought to stop them. Leave them alone. Then illusions won't appear. And since there are no illusions, when you don't take note of the reflecting images, while the images may be reflected in the mind, it's just the same as if they weren't. 1,000 thoughts may arise, yet it's just as though they hadn't. They won't give you a bit of trouble. You won't have any thoughts to clear from your mind, not a single thought to cut off. Bankei spoke to the assembly on the first day of the 12th month. And he spoke these words: "At my temples, every moment, day and night, is the fixed and appointed time for practice. I don't do as they do elsewhere and tell you that the period of practice begins at such and such a time. Everyone doesn't start dashing around making a great fuss. There was once a monk in my temple who had been dozing off. Another monk saw him and really laid into him with a stick, the Zen stick. I reprimanded him. Why hit him when he's enjoying a pleasant nap? Do you think he leaves the Buddha mind and goes somewhere else when he sleeps? Now, I don't urge people to sleep around here, but once they are asleep, you're making a serious mistake if you hit them. Nothing like that is allowed to happen here anymore. We don't go out of our way to urge people to take naps. Yet neither do we hit them or scold them for it if they do. We don't scold them or praise them for sleeping any more than we scold them or praise them for not sleeping. If you stay awake, you stay awake. If you sleep, you sleep. When you sleep in the same Buddha mind as you were awake in. When you are awake in the same Buddha mind that you were sleeping in. You sleep in the Buddha mind while you sleep, and are up and about in the Buddha mind while you're up and about. That way, you always stay in the Buddha mind. You're never apart from it for an instant. You're wrong if you think that people become something different when they fall asleep. If they were in the Buddha mind only during their waking hours and changed into something else when they went to sleep, they wouldn't be the true Buddhist Dharma. It would mean that they were always in a state of transmigration. All of you people here are working so hard to become Buddhas. That's the reason you want to scold and beat the ones who fall asleep. But it isn't right. You each received one thing from your mother when you were born. The unborn Buddha mind. Nothing else. Rather than to try to become a Buddha, when you just stay constantly in the unborn mind, sleeping in it when you sleep, up and about in it when you're awake, you're a living Buddha in your everyday life, at all times. There's not a moment when you're not a Buddha. Since you're always a Buddha, there's no Buddha in addition to that for you to become. Instead of trying to become a Buddha, then, a much easier and shorter way is to just be a Buddha. The unborn Buddha mind deals freely and spontaneously with anything that presents itself to it. But if something should happen to make you change the Buddha mind into thought, then you run into trouble and lose that freedom. Let me give you an example. Suppose a woman is engaged in sewing something. A friend enters the room and begins speaking to her. As long as she listens to her friend and sews in the unborn, she has no trouble doing both. But if she gives her attention to her friend's words, and a thought arises in her mind as she thinks about what to reply, her hands stop sewing. If she turns her attention to her sewing and thinks about that, she fails to catch everything that her friend is saying, and the conversation does not proceed smoothly. In either case, her Buddha mind has slipped from the place of the unborn. She has transformed it into thought. As her thoughts fix upon one thing, they are blank to all others, depriving the mind of its freedom. We can hear everything, we can see everything, we can receive everything. In the unborn Buddha mind, there's no boundary for us. I'm going to finish here with a meditation, so any of you who have time to join me, I'm sharing a 30-minute recorded meditation of Ajashanti, guiding a meditation on the unborn. It's another master who speaks very much of the unborn and Bankei. So I'd like to share that now, just to sit in the unborn Buddha mind for 30 minutes. Om Shanti. Shanti, Shanti, Shanti.
So as always, we just take the first couple of minutes to just follow the breath down in the belly, just to gather your attention. Very easy, soft. When we're breathing down in the belly, we're breathing like infants do. If you watch an infant, you'll see that their stomach moves when they breathe, much more so than their chest. So it's a very natural way to breathe. And as we relax, we'll just naturally move down from breathing so much from the chest, and will naturally descend into breathing from the belly a bit more. It's just a matter of relaxation. And remember that throughout this meditation, if you should ever get kind of lost or lost in your mind, you can always just come back to the breath for a few moments. Allow your attention to gather once again. And have the feeling that you're resting your attention in the breathing rather than trying to hold your attention upon the breathing. You're just resting it. There's a great difference between focusing your attention on something and resting it on something. We're just resting the attention in the breath for a moment. So just really notice the quality right now of the in-breath. It's the in-breath where the body takes in its life force, takes in the oxygen. So with each breath in, your body is receiving, drawing in the life force. Goes into the lungs, and through the lungs, it's distributed out the body through your blood flow. And you notice that your body only takes in as much oxygen as it needs. Sometimes the breathing may be very deep, full. Sometimes it may be very, very soft, very subtle. Your body won't need a lot of life force, a lot of oxygen. Just takes in exactly what it needs. Now become aware of the out-breath more. With each out-breath, your body is releasing the life force, letting go of it. The last thing you'll ever do in your life is to breathe out. It'll be your last act. So imagine for a moment that each out-breath had the quality as if it was the last out-breath. You can imagine if it was your last out-breath, if it was the last breath you take. Feel the quality of letting go. And you can follow the out-breath as if it's the last one you'll take. Follow the out-breath and it just takes you into a state of deep stillness. And the out-breath can take you deeper and deeper into that stillness. Into that expanse of nothingness beyond all knowing. And very quietly, very subtly, you just let yourself go into that stillness, into that vastness. You can let go of following the breath. The out-breath takes you into the vastness. You just let go of following the breath. You just let go into that vastness, into that stillness. And you're just letting go and letting go and letting go. And you allow yourself to really feel that quality of stillness, quiet. Feel it through your whole being. It has its own sort of energetic signature, its own energetic imprint. And just allow that stillness to have its imprint upon your whole body, your whole being. Both your physical body, your subtle body, your nervous system. And let it all become accustomed to the energetic quality of that stillness. You're just relaxing into the unborn. into who you were before you were born, before you assumed form. Before you had a gender or a past, or a future. Now I want you to draw that unformed and unborn stillness, draw it into the body with the in-breath, right in the bottom of the belly. So each in-breath, you're drawing that primordial stillness into your being. Drawing it deep into the cells of the body. You draw it into the body, down through the lower abdomen, you breathe it in. You breathe it right up your back. You can almost imagine that there's a kind of a very subtle, energetic column running right up your spine. And you're just drawing the energy of eternity right up the back. And then when you breathe out, it just comes right down the front of you. So once you've breathed it in for a while, you might notice there's just, as I said, a very, almost like an energetic column running up your back. You're not trying to make anything happen. You're not trying to create anything. You're just breathing that stillness into your being. You let it go where it wants to go. Sometimes it'll go up your back and down your arms. Sometimes it'll go down your legs. Sometimes over the top of your head. Just breathing that stillness in. And then letting it go with each out breath. Breathing it in, letting it go with each out breath, as if it's your very last out breath. And then you just relinquish all intention. Now you're not going to focus on anything. You just relinquish all intention, all focus. You're just slowly letting the meditator go. Letting it go. Allowing the meditator to drop away. You just allow everything to be. No meditator, no meditation, just being.
Thank you for sitting with me. In the unborn, in the Buddha mind, in peace. Om Shanti, 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 Om. Mujiji Ki Jai, Anantaji Ki Jai, Sangha of Being Ji Ki Jai. Deep sleep, beloveds. Rest in the unborn, wherever you are, wherever you go. How could you ever not? How could you ever be anywhere else but this?